Welcome to the Let's Talk Kids Health Facebook Live Show, episode 11. I'm Dr. Narissa Bauer, your host. I'm a behavioral pediatrician and blogger of Let's Talk Kids Health. The concept of this show is to share information about behavioral health and wellness for children and families everywhere. Each week, I plan to bring you topics and guests to help me advance this mission so that we can all talk together. This episode was pre-recorded and premiering live. And remember, if you don't want to miss future episodes or maybe check out the past ones, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer, MD, and follow my blog Facebook page, Let's Talk Kids Health. Okay, so now to this week's guest. Dr. Mary Barbera fell into the autism world in the late 1990s when her son Lucas started showing signs of autism. Over the past 2 decades, Mary has transformed from an overwhelmed parent and RN to a board-certified behavior analyst, online course creator, podcaster, and best-selling author. Her new book, Turn Autism Around, has just come out this week and has already reached #1 best-selling new release in 5 categories. I'm so excited to have her. Hello, Mary.
Thanks so much for having me on your show, Narissa. It's great to meet you and to get to know you better as well.
Yes, I am so excited. Thank you so much. Autism is a very important subject, and I have not yet had a guest to talk about this. So I'm so excited that you've agreed to come on the show.
April is Autism Awareness Month, too. So this show is going to be airing April 1st, so it's a perfect time to have the topic of autism covered. So thanks for the great timing as well.
Of course. So I wanted to ask you, you say in your book that you fell into the autism world. What do you mean by that?
I say that I fell into the autism world because when my husband, who's a physician, he's an emergency medicine physician, he brought up the possibility that my 21-month-old son, Lucas, might have autism back when he was just 21 months of age. I had just returned from a well visit with my 2-month-old son, Spencer, and before I left for the well visit, my husband said, ask the doctor how many words Lucas should have. And I did, and the doctor said he should have about 25 words at 21 months of age. And so literally on the way home, I'm not thinking anything about autism. That didn't even cross my mind, but I'm like counting E-I-E-I-O as 5 words. Mm-hmm. I'm counting this little script he used to say at times, which was now I know was called delayed echolalia. But we used to take him to the park, and he would sometimes script after we got home. Please do not feed the ducks, quack, quack. Okay, there's another 8 words. Like I was just grasping at straws. And so when I got home, he said, well, what did he say about Lucas? And I said 25 words, and he said, well, he doesn't have 25 words. And I'm like, oh yeah, I counted. He does. I'm counting words I hadn't heard for months. And he looked at me and he said, so you don't think he might have autism? And I was like, boom, like a bomb was dropped. And I felt like I fell into a deep hole because I had no idea what to look for and the signs, no idea that there was actually real treatment that could have really started to help me turn things around. There was no Facebook, there was no YouTube, there was no Google search. I basically was like, went into a deep state of denial for 15 to 18 months until he was finally diagnosed the day before he was 3. So, and then I had to figure out how to climb out of that hole, have Lucas climb out, with me, and then start climbing a mountain to try to help him. And so that's why I describe my fall. And when I have my Turn Autism Around podcast, I always ask guests to describe their fall into the autism world. Because even if it's just a professional with that's not a parent, it's often the case that professionals fall into the autism world by answering an ad to work with a young child with autism. And then they fall in love with working with kids with autism because you really can see great gains. And that's the whole falling into the autism world.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I can only imagine how, you talk about that raw emotion and just when your husband used that word and your sort of shock at like, wait, could it be? And having to work through that. But you're right. I mean, early intervention has proven to work and to help move the trajectory and the outcomes for these children. So early identification is absolutely paramount. So briefly tell us how you went from an overwhelmed parent to a BCBA/D author, PhD, online course creator, podcaster, and international keynote speaker.
So when my husband first mentioned the possibility of autism, and I told him I never ever want to hear the word autism again, I at that point I had a master's degree in nursing administration. My husband was a physician, so he did not bring up autism, and we were both, keeping our fingers crossed that it wasn't autism. So we got him into typical preschool right when he turned 2. We started speech therapy when he was 2.5. We were hoping that it would just be a speech delay, but it turned out to be more. So once he was diagnosed, right before he was diagnosed, what actually got me out of denial was reading a couple of books by Catherine Maurice that she wrote in the 1990s. And this was about behavioral treatment, ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis treatment, which was and still is the most validated treatment for autism. And once I started reading about that, I was like, whoa, there's a lot I could do. Oh my gosh, I didn't know. Kids can, the spectrum is so wide. Kids can get, in some cases, become indistinguishable from their peers, is what this articles and books said. And Lucas didn't look that impaired at that point. He was 2. Mm-hmm. He was attending typical 2-year-old preschool without an aid. He wasn't hitting anybody, biting anybody. He wasn't rocking. He wasn't stimming, so I was just like, oh my gosh, I got to get on this yesterday. Now I need the diagnosis immediately. Right. Mm-hmm. And, so, when we finally got to the doctor, when he was diagnosed with moderate to severe autism the day before he was 3. And even that surprised my husband because, he didn't quote unquote look that bad. He didn't look that impaired, and I asked the doctor about becoming indistinguishable and ABA treatment. And he said, well, you definitely need to start ABA treatment. Yes, I am directing that is what you should be looking into. But in terms of becoming indistinguishable or getting, all better from this, he said in his long career, he hadn't seen kids like Lucas that presented like Lucas, because Lucas at this point had moderate severe autism, and he looked pretty impaired, at least to the doctor. And while then he didn't say, oh, well, if you would have gotten him here at 21 months when your husband first met you, he didn't say any of that. But the whole time I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my denial sealed Lucas's fate. And that is no longer, if he would have been younger and more mild, he would have had a better chance for that outcome. So then I was extra guilty, extra devastated. And I was just like, driving home from getting the diagnosis, my husband saying, well, I guess he'll never go to college. He'll never get married. Lucas is sitting in the back, strapped into the car seat. I'm crying. Lucas is silent. I'm like, I read that book. I know I'm late. I know it's partially my fault that we didn't get on that. It's totally my fault. But, we also didn't keep him in a closet. We were trying. We were, typical preschool and speech therapy. I would beg the speech therapist, what books can I read? What videos can I watch? I'm at home all day. I can do stuff. Teach me. And there wasn't anything. And so on the way home, I'm like, you know what? The kids in the studies that showed that they became indistinguishable, some of them had severe autism. Some of them were 3.5. I'm going to give it the college try just because this doctor didn't see anything, even if my chances are 0.1%. Because ABA helps kids, even if they don't have the best outcomes, it still helps kids learn to talk, learn to produce tantrums, learn to sleep better, eat better, potty train more easily, all the things. It made sense to me as a neurologic nurse. I was always in the neuro rehab field. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other. I'm going to blast as much ABA 40 hours a week of ABA treatment. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get it paid for. I'm going to start it, and we'll see. So then a couple of years later, I also founded a local autism chapter because I was just like, wow, there are so many kids that need help. And back then, the rate was 1 in 500 of kids on the spectrum, and now it's about 1 in 50. So right out of the gate, I started with ABA, I started with advocacy, and then it was clear that I had to learn more. I became a board-certified behavior analyst. Then my husband actually got a flyer that a local college was starting a PhD program in leadership. And I'm like, nope, that's for me. I'm going to do that. And I wrote my book, The Verbal Behavior Approach, which is in over a dozen languages. That was published in 2007. So I've traveled the world speaking on autism. And then when I graduated with my PhD in 2011, people were saying, so what are you going to do now? And I said, well, I have to figure out how to get my message online, because going door to door, where I was really perfecting my step-by-step procedures with very young birth to 3 kids, and also traveling internationally. Neither of them were going to move the needle. And so then basically in 2015, I became an online marketer. And so that's how I progressed. And now really, I wasn't planning on writing a second book, but what happened was I created my first course, and then I created an intermediate learner course because people were begging me, like, I need to teach prepositions and colors and interverbal webbing and all these more complicated tasks that I knew what to do, but was too hard to put it in a book. So I made another course, and then I made my third course, which really was pivotal. And this was for toddlers, parents of toddlers and preschoolers, as well as early intervention professionals. And that's really where the world opened up, and I saw that kids I never met were going from 2 words to 500 words in a month. Kids were going from banging their head on hard surfaces 100 times a day to 0 or near 0 levels. And these are kids that parents took my online courses. I never saw them. I never analyzed any videos. I never gave them individual feedback. And half of the parents that take that course don't even have a diagnosis yet, because with 1 in 50 kids having autism, the waiting list for, you should know, Narissa, waiting lists for evaluations, treatment, and really good treatment. Like, you might be able to get an hour of an OT and an hour of speech therapy. But these people are seasoned professionals, great with some things, but they don't have a behavioral lens. And you may be getting contradictory information, like the OT might say he needs a pacifier to soothe him, and the speech therapist says, get rid of the pacifier so he talks more. And so I come at it as a parent, as a registered nurse, as a behavior analyst, as an author, as an online marketer, where I can simplify my message to help parents, empower parents to detect and treat the early signs of autism. So this is the book, Turn Autism Around, which just came out March 30th. This is the book that I needed when my husband first mentioned the possibility of autism. It's also the book I needed when he was 5 or 10 years old, because he still struggled with sleep. And I have a chapter on going to the doctor's, dentist, haircuts without a fuss, desensitization strategies, which in the world of COVID, I mean, I don't specifically talk about wearing masks, but you can desensitize and repair anything. So it was a lot of work, much harder than my first book, but I am really proud that I got it out, and then I wrote it during quarantine. The whole 2020 year I was writing, and now it does really feel like birthing a baby at this point.
Well, can I just say that the fact that you were seeing these outcomes from parents who you weren't personally treating, and yet, I mean, how amazing, what a feeling of getting that useful information to the people who need it the most, and they were seeing these outcomes. You were really moving the needle there and really helping a lot of families. That's wonderful. So at the end of the show, I'll ask you to sort of help us find, if readers or listeners to this show are interested, how they can find you and your courses too. So what are the early signs of autism, and why are they often missed?
Yes, and another statistic before we jump into that, because it kind of is related, is now about 1 in 50 kids will get a diagnosis of autism, but 1 in every 6 kids is going to get a diagnosis of some developmental disorder, including autism, ADHD, speech disorders, learning disabilities. And so these signs look very similar when kids are 1, 2, and 3. You can't really tell. And some of these signs are any of these disorders. Right. It could even turn out that your child is gifted and showing some of these signs, some of these social language delays or highly restricted interests. So some of the signs to watch for are social communication abilities. If it's a baby, not babbling back and forth with you. Eye contact could be a little dimmer. Social smiles might not happen at all or as frequently as typical that you'd expect typically. Pointing is usually delayed, pointing with your index finger, not just reaching up for things. So that's a really important sign, but it happens, should it begin to happen before 1, but even if it's 18 months, but kids that are 3 that don't point frequently tend to be at higher risk. Attention issues as well as imitation problems. All kids learn through imitation, first by babbling and then by doing play, following people. Oh, mommy's sweeping the floor. Let me get my pretend broom and start sweeping. But it's a moving target because your child's getting older and having new milestones. And so it's like confusing to say, and just because a child can point doesn't mean they don't have autism. Mm-hmm. So it's super confusing. Restricted interests and repetitive behaviors are big with autism. Obsessiveness with trains or letters and numbers. However, rocking back and forth or stimming with your hands. But I know typical kids that have some stimming. Right. I know gifted kids like my second son, Spencer, who ended up with a gifted IQ. He was pretty focused on trains early on. And so it is really confusing. And then the other big sign of autism is loss of skills. So my son, Lucas, did point and then he stopped pointing, or he stopped pointing a lot. He did wave and then he stopped waving. So loss of skills. He used to sing E-I-E-I-O and then it was gone. And so back then I didn't, he had some language, but I didn't know how to get him to say that language. But now I do. I now call those words pop out words. And if you have a child that is speaking but not speaking a lot, then you definitely need the information that I have in my book and my courses, because there are proven procedures that I outline everywhere that shows you, the parent or the early intervention professional, how to get kids talking, how to reduce tantrums, and how to improve all the areas that I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thank you for pointing out those early warning signs, and then especially the regression piece or the loss of those developmental milestones. In your son's case, was it sort of abrupt or was it sort of more kind of over time?
Well, and it was complicated because I was pregnant. Right? Mm-hmm. I live somewhere where we have 4 seasons. So it was fall and winter. I was pregnant. He was spending a lot more time inside watching TV. And so all of these things, so it was more subtle. I was also a first-time mom. So he became pickier with eating, which I actually didn't know. And I learned while I was writing the chapter on feeding. I learned this from Dr. Keith Williams, who is an international feeding expert. But there is new research to show that picky eating and really having feeding problems is a diagnostic indicator for autism as well. So if you have 2 2-year-olds and they have kind of the same kind of delays, but one is extremely selective or has feeding issues, that child is much more highly likely to get a diagnosis of autism.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was brand new information to me. So that actually made it into the book because I had Dr. Williams on my podcast, and then I also had him read the draft. And so we managed to get a couple things about, things that I didn't know.
Yeah, and now it's in a book. And so now you're going to be able to get it out and that useful information to parents. So along those lines, Mary, do you mind if we can go through, parents listening to the show, viewing the show, what are the 3 steps parents can take today if maybe they're sort of concerned or they're thinking about this and they're like, oh my gosh, what is the 3 steps that they can take?
Yeah, so the first step is to eyes wide open, try not to be in denial like I was, and know that it's really hard to tell what it is, but you can make progress just like anything else. If you have, even if you have a 5th grader who's struggling with reading, it's not going to help to just go like, oh, maybe it'll get better. Well, no, it's probably not going to get better on its own. So we want to, eyes wide open, look at what your baby or infant, toddler, preschooler, or even school-age child, look at what the milestones are. Mm-hmm. The CDC has a really good website. The Act Early Centers for Disease Control website is good with knowing. I can look, okay, I have an 18-month-old. What should they be doing? Not just in terms of language either. Motor. Kids with autism tend to be more delayed with walking. Not always, but that could be a problem. Cup usage, drinking out of an open cup or through a straw, using utensils. Those are important milestones that if your child is going to daycare, that's kind of checked off and moved on. You progress, you are potty trained, you can go to this next classroom, but if you have your children at home without those checklists, those can sometimes be a problem. So I'd say step 1 is to learn the typical milestones. And if you have a 2-year-old and they're meeting most of the milestones of an 18-month-old, they might just be a little delayed. But if you look and they're 2 or 3, but functioning at a 9-month-old level for something, then you've got a big gap.
Yeah.
And then step number 2 is if you notice a big gap, don't freak out. We can teach kids. We can teach kids to point and to drink out of an open cup and to talk and to follow directions. We can teach kids all of this. The second step I would recommend, especially if there's a big gap, is to make an appointment with your pediatrician, like a sick visit. Most people don't think about sick visits to discuss development. And I didn't, even as a nurse married to a physician. Mm-hmm. Make a sick appointment because they're, at least when and you can correct me, Narissa, but there was no well visit between the ages of 2 and 3 when Lucas's development was falling apart. And so, make an appointment. If your child is going to daycare or preschool, check with the teacher, see if they are falling behind in group responding. And, they might have a tendency to have more tantrums. Yep. They may be held back or kicked out of preschool or daycare. I know one of my one-to-one clients before I started doing the online work was she was held back in daycare because she wasn't potty trained and her mom had to pay a premium to keep her there without being potty trained. Mm-hmm. So step 2 is talk to your pediatrician and or your teachers, your early intervention, but I think I didn't know it was my job to keep track of my child's development or to know the developmental milestones. But it really is. And then step 3 is learn about the Turn Autism Around approach. I mean, I lay it out, lay out the signs, lay out the motivation, give you lots of stories to show how kids have progressed. And even if your child remains, like my son Lucas is 24 years of age, he remains with moderate severe autism and intellectual disability. He needs 24/7 care. I still am having a great life. And so I also want to empower parents that even if their child is severely impaired, maybe they have a genetic condition. This isn't just for, children showing signs of autism, just children having any kind of delays. I want to empower parents to detect and treat the earliest signs and really put one foot in front of the other. And my ultimate goal is for both of my sons, for all of my online clients, for all of your clients and patients, is for each child to be as safe as possible, as independent as possible, and as happy as possible, reaching his or her fullest potential. And that fullest potential mark is a moving target, right? Because Lucas has reached his fullest potential at 24, but the game's not over. There's medical issues that come up. He had COVID in the fall. There's just, it's complicated. So turnautismaround.com is where you can get all the information about my book. But if you are out and about, or you're at home and it's been a while since you've heard me speak and you're like, what was that woman's name? Or what's the website? Just search Mary Autism plus any of these topics: denial, body, sleep, tantrums, talking. I probably have some kind of short video clip or podcast that could help you really start turning things around today.
Right. And by the way, you're like, if you search any of those terms, you're like right there at the top. So, you are findable. So that's great. And, I was going to ask you, and before we go to the next question, I've had instances where I've seen parents, for a behavior issue, and, we go through all those developmental milestones, which I think absolutely is important to be mindful of. Go to that CDC website, know the signs, act early. But I've had instances where parents are like, oh yeah, she is like talking, but we find out that it is more the rote memorization, that scripted language. Do you have any sort of tips for parents who are, watching this right now and thinking, or maybe trying to count how many words? Like, how do you distinguish the difference between that scripted language versus what we would expect normally?
Right. And I think I was in denial. I think I said earlier on that Lucas had one little script: please do not feed the ducks, quack, quack. And I was literally counting those as 8 words. So in my book, I have a whole chapter on assessment. I have a whole and in the chapter, I have a 1-page assessment tool where we can get a snapshot in 10 minutes of where your child's at with all of these areas. And the other thing that's confusing is, a lot of professionals teach kids to say, I want in front of things, or that's in front of things. And we can't really count those as spontaneous sentences. And I'm a big believer in sticking with 1-word utterances for, till we get 50 or 100, and then teaching actions and building language so it doesn't become rote. So I have several video blogs. I talk about stimming in my book. Chapter 9 is about advanced language, and I go over 5 mistakes people are making. And one of the mistakes is focusing on length of utterance and length of the sentences, because I think that builds a lot of rote responding. And then it takes a little bit to get undone. And to get the child really spontaneously speaking. So if you have a child out there and you want to do a language sample, if your child is scripting, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We know the child can talk, his articulation is good, he has a motivation to speak in some ways, but kind of mark those as, this is a script, this was spontaneously asking for cookie, this was, some way, keep track of what's rote responding and what's spontaneous. And all throughout my book, I talk about ways to increase the spontaneous language, right. And not to get rid of scripting as our main focus, but the more functional language the child has, the better he will do, the better his life will be. It really is important that we not just say scripting's a part of autism, tantrums, biting are a part of autism. No, none of this has to be a part of autism. We want each child to get more independent with speech, more independent with self-care, leisure activities, and we want to keep moving forward with all kids.
Right, absolutely. And what I love so far hearing you talk is central to your message is that there's hope and to keep moving forward, right? To not, you can feel the feels when you get that initial sort of diagnosis, but you've got to keep moving because you can advocate for your child and move them in that right direction. So that's going to feed in, I think, nicely to this next question. So, what does turn autism around mean?
Yeah, some people don't like the term turn autism around. And really, it was naming my podcast. I took a course that basically he said, pick 3 words, it's got to be catchy enough. It's got to be, your main topic, the word should be in there. And so I was playing around and I'm like, turn autism around. That sounds really, I want to turn things around. And so, but a lot of people think she means curing autism. I don't want my autism turned around, some conversational adults would say. And it's a little bit more controversial than I thought it would be, but all I want to do is help parents turn things around. Any struggle, I want to help people turn it around.
Yeah.
So turning autism around means making things better, helping each child overcome the delays as much as possible so that they're as independent, as safe, and as happy as possible. Reach their fullest potential and constantly be striving towards that goal. Not just for the kids, not just for the kids with autism, your typical kids. It's also for you as an adult, as a parent, as a professional, as a pediatrician. We're always striving to be as safe as possible, as independent as possible, and as happy as possible, right? So if you're banging your head on hard surfaces causing a concussion, that's not, in no one's world is that appropriate and leading to full potential.
Right.
If you've got pop-out words or scripting all day long, that's not leading to, I had a client who was in 6th grade and he scripted nonsense language 500 times a day. And when we're thinking about that child, for instance, what is he going to do? He can't work at a restaurant because he'd be scripting all, disrupting things and interrupting people. But what we found is he was very quiet and his brain was calm when he was engaged in meaningful tasks with the right level of reinforcement. And so we turned it around and got his scripting down to single-digit numbers. And we were able to pick vocational tasks where he was calm and happy and productive.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I mean, I think, again, thank you for explaining that because, again, it says so much about your passion and what it is that you're hoping that your audience will receive is that just turning things around for everybody. I mean, and most importantly, the child, but for the entire family. I think every parent wants their child to reach full potential. So it's really admirable, the work that you're doing. So I think we already talked about this, but again, Mary, if you don't mind, how can people find out more info about you and your book and all the courses that you offer, your podcast?
Right. I have a big website. We're actually in the middle of a big redo of my website to make it even better, but Mary Autism plus whatever topic you're struggling with, and turnautismaround.com will get you to all the book information. There's a 2-minute trailer about the book, how to order, and all the book bonuses and resources. So every form I have in here is available as a free PDF fillable form. This is, somebody said, well, how many steps or how many strategies or tips are in this book? I think there's probably over 1,000.
Wow.
It is not the kind of book where you're going to be able to read, glance at, put down, give away, loan out. This is really going to be a book that is going to be helpful, whether you have a 2-year-old with early signs of autism or a 5 or 10-year-old that's still struggling with sleep, eating, potty training, tantrums. We need to, and it's only the information in my book. I mean, if you want more, my online courses and really getting this whole Turn Autism Around approach out to parents and professionals around the world, because it really is a child-friendly approach, proven strategies, from my background as a mom, as an advocate, as a registered nurse, as a behavior analyst. Like, I really care about helping each child reach his or her fullest potential. So I am really excited to have the opportunity to come on and tell your listeners all about it. And just came out March 30th, and in time for Autism Awareness Month. So I am just so happy to have. It took a lot of effort to write it. Now I just want to spread it
Get
as
it out
far
there
as possible.
Yes, yes. And like I said, I mean, you probably last year when you sat down to write this, I mean, was your goal to get it released at this exact time? Because it's perfect. So.
Yeah, it was. I have an agent and a big publisher, Hay House, with distribution by Penguin Random. So actually, it was my agent's idea. She said, well, is there any month or week that would be good timing? Actually, April would be excellent timing. So that's why March 30th was picked. And I just gave my agent credit for that pick, because unfortunately, the media doesn't, even though it's happening, 1 in 50 kids have autism and 1 in 6 kids are delayed. Media doesn't cover this as much as needs to be covered. Mm-hmm. But they're more willing to cover autism topics in April. So, yeah, I'm happy to spread the word. Whoever will listen, I'm there.
Yeah, well, you can count on me to help you kind of spread the awareness, spread information about this book. It seems like it's going to be a well-trusted, well-worn resource for the families who need it. So thank you, Mary, for coming on the show and sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your personal stories. And like I said, your passion really just comes through when talking about this. So congratulations again.
Thank you. And I do want to have you, Narissa, on my Turn Autism Around podcast soon as well. So I'm happy for the connection, and I look forward to many more years of collaboration.
I would love that. Thank you, Mary. Well, so next week's special guest is Dr. Jennifer Reed when we talk about how to get the best sleep of your life. Don't forget to tune into that. That'll be Thursday at 8 p.m. And also, I do want to let my viewers know that the next round of my Teach Me ADHD class registration is now open. I have 2 classes that are available in April. And again, it's an 8-week course. More information is available here at the link. And so for now, please, when you do watch this episode, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave a question or comment, and then we will go back in and respond to as many of those as possible. So thank you very much for listening. And again, if you have any suggestions or any future topics or guests that you would like to see on the show, please feel free to reach out to me at letstalkkidshealth@gmail.com. Drop me a comment below or message me on social media. And again, just to remember, consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, Narissa Bauer MD, to be alerted when I go live each week, or follow my blog Facebook page. That's it for now.